For our last quiz session this season, we've invited, as usual, 4 opera experts. They are John Covenny, Director of Artist Relations for Angel Records, Boris Goldovsky, founder and artistic director of the Goldovsky Opera Institute and Goldovsky Opera Theater, and Mr. Goldovsky also has a radio program on Thursday evenings over WQXR called All About Music. Richard Mohr is a musical director of RCA Victor, and he is the producer of our gift package recording of Puccini's La Rondine. And to complete our quartet of experts, we have David Stivender, one of the assistant conductors at the Metropolitan and also the assistant chorus master. Welcome to the quiz, gentlemen. And here's our first question for today, which comes from Walter Mills of San Francisco, California. In the next act of this afternoon's opera, in the famous fortune-telling scene, we know that Carmen's cards predict death both for her and Don José. Can you remember what the cards foretell for Carmen's 2 companions, Frasquita and Mercedes, as they simultaneously read their own fortunes? Mr. Goldovsky?
Well, Frasquita sees in her cards a lover who is going to be a particularly fine lover, and Mercedes sees in her cards something even better than that. And this is that she is going to meet a rich old gentleman who will have the good taste to die, leaving her a rich widow.
Yes. Makes a marvelous contrast with Carmen's tragic part. Here's a rather tricky question from Bella Tillis, the chairman of the music department of Midwood High School in Brooklyn, New York. She wonders if you know what the following names have in common. There are several of them. I'll just read you the surnames. Bazzini, Boucheron, Buzzola, Cagnoni, Coccia, Gaspari, Mabellini, Nini, Pedrotti, Petrella, Platania, Ricci, and Verdi. Mr. Mohr?
I believe they were all composers of Italian opera at the time when Verdi first began to write opera in the early years of the 19th century. The Riccis, in fact, were almost a factory, as I recall. There are so many Riccis at that time that you can't sort them out.
And Mr. Covenny?
Nothing I have in common is they've all been forgotten, except Verdi.
Except Verdi. But they are also remembered somewhat for a project that they were all involved in. Does that give you the project was a project of Verdi's, but
This
Mr.
was
Stivender?
the famous Requiem in honor of Rossini. They were
Right,
all
you
to
are.
write a section of the Requiem, which later was abandoned, and then Verdi pulled his copy out later and finished it.
And what did he do with his part of it? You know the rest of the story? Complete it
Well,
for us.
he wrote his part. Not all of them did write their part, and then he put the last section, the Libera Mea.
Libera Mea.
Yes, and then he used the Libera Mea again later on
When he wrote his...
In his own Requiem.
Yes, in his Requiem, but for Manzoni.
Right.
Yes, right you are. Here's one I almost doubt that you'll ever be able to guess the answer to. Edmund J. Blau of Kensington, Maryland, writes us this. The panel members, as experienced Wagnerites, can probably name Brynhilde's 8 sisters without much trouble. Although I might doubt that. But that's not even the question. The question, which I feel even more skeptical about knowing the answer to, is this. Can you tell us which of the sisters in the 3rd act of the Walküre brought heroes with them to the gathering at the beginning of Act 3, and what were the names of the heroes they brought? You all look very baffled. No? You're the 4 of the Valkyries, Mr.
I
Mohr?
don't have the least idea, but I'm sure one was called Eric the Red. He's always around.
They're called the something, each of them,
But
Mr.
didn't one
Goldovsky.
bring Siegmund, the Braune Welsum?
No, he's left, I'm afraid, on the battlefield. I'm afraid I must give you this. The Helmwege brought Sintholt the Hegling, and Ortlinde brought Wittig the Irming, and Grimgerde and Rossweisse also brought anonymous heroes to the battlefield.
Some party.
I'm sure some of those deliveries steak.
Now, quite often, for our last broadcast of the season, some listener tabulates the answers that have been missed by various panels during the course of the season. This year, Evelyn Prendergast of Minneapolis has performed this painstaking chore and sent us a number of such questions. Whether you were on the particular panel or not when the question was missed, let's see how much smarter you are today. Here's the first question that was missed. In Act 3 of Lohengrin, when the hero says farewell to his Elsa, he gives her 3 things for her brother. And the question is, what are they and for what purpose were they given? Mr. Goldovsky.
I remember a ring and a sword.
And,
Yes, you're
and
perfectly
the horn
right.
is the third.
The horn.
And
and
Mr.
the horn.
Stivender, you're right. The horn is the third. Now tell us what these things were for.
Oh, who cares?
Oh, I think you must have been one of those that missed it before, Mr. Goldovsky. No excuses, no excuses. Mr. Mohr.
I think the ring is probably for when she next decides to marry. The horn is to blow at midnight, and the shield, I couldn't have any idea what it's
No,
for.
it's not a
Probably
shield.
the horn is to summon Lohengrin again in time of
The
need,
horn
right?
is to bring him aid in an hour
Right,
of
the
need,
sword must be to protect the realm,
or to bring him victory in battle,
right?
which
And
is
the
much
ring,
the
I
same.
assume, is a symbol of unity and
Well, it's
in
a
the
symbol
realm.
of remembrance, something so
Oh,
that he
that
will
too, right,
remember Lohengrin himself. Now, can you name 3 operas in which the lovers never have a love duet? And that rules out married couples for this question. Mr. Covenny.
This is a little far-fetched, but in Rosenkavalier, Octavian and the Marschallin never have a duet. Oh, excuse me, they certainly do in the first act.
2 hours.
Mr. Goldovsky?
Tatiana and Eugene Onegin never have a love duet, and they're in love with each other at various times.
Yes, but at the wrong times.
That doesn't matter. They don't have a love duet.
They don't get together simultaneously. Mr. Mohr?
Well, I believe Carmen and Don Jose don't have what you would call a proper love duet.
No, I think, would you?
During the Seguidilla, there's a little suggest moment there. That I
he
saw.
doesn't
Also in the
really
third
respond
act,
to
he
much.
also succumbs, too.
Yes,
So one might interpret it that way, possibly.
Yes, where she
Mr.
kisses
Coveney?
him.
In the Meistersinger, I don't think Ava and Walter have a love duet.
Oh, yes, under the tree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in the
that's
second act,
pretty
I
awfully
would say
quiet,
that they
though.
have. I'd say that they have a love duet in the second act. Mr. Goldovsky?
See my Russian antecedents. I think Herman and German and Lisa don't really have a proper love duet.
They have a duet, but not a happy love duet. They
not
have
the
this
happy-
tragic
they have an
duet at the end of
unhappy
the-
love
Yes,
duet,
you're
that's-
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Now, are there any operas in which the curtain does not, as we traditionally say, slowly fall, but comes down abruptly for dramatic effect? And tell us also whether the composer specifies in the score that the curtain must come down fast. How about operas with a fast curtain at the end for a specific dramatic effect? Mr. Stivender.
Well, in Wozzeck, at the end of the second act, I believe, it comes slowly, and then immediately at a certain point, it must drop quickly.
Yes,
It's all
and,
marked very carefully in the score.
and there's another opera that has exactly the same effect at the end of the first act. First a very, very slow curtain, and then suddenly...
Rosenkavalier.
Right, you are, Rosenkavalier.
Yeah.
On the last
on
beat
the
of
last
the last
corona.
measure.
Here must the curtain fall, right?
Yes,
Fast.
yes. Mr. Coveney
I
had his
think the
hand up, I
Salome
think.
curtain is a very fast one, but I don't know whether Strauss indicated it that way.
I think he does. I think he's... maybe it's just because there's only time for a very fast curtain by the time the curtain comes there. Dan.
No one would want to see the body after the soldiers got through with it.
No. There are others, Pagliacci, Cavalleria, and so on, but that's not, we could go on for quite a time on that. Now, we've had several questions on this next topic here, but the one with the earliest postmark actually comes from 2 listeners. Jonathan Dunn Rankin of San Diego, California, and Welton Jones of La Mesa, California. Their letters point out that there are actually 3 versions of Bizet's Carmen. 2 you know about, I'm sure, and the 3rd recently discovered. Would the panel describe the differences among these 3 versions of Carmen and tell us why the changes were made, and finally, which of the 3 versions they prefer? Gentlemen, Mr. Goldovsky?
Well, we of course know the dialogue version, which is occasionally performed, and we know the recitative version with recitatives by Ernest Guiraud. The recently discovered, if you may call it that, is the original version.
That's the 3rd one.
That's right. It was the reason that it was, so to speak, recently discovered is that Guiraud, at the same time that he made recitatives, also made several cuts. and unfortunately not only made the cuts, but also cut out several sections out of the autograph manuscript.
Yes.
So that at the time that we were able to get microfilms of the autograph manuscript, which in my case was around 1945, as soon as the war was over, we found in it several sections which are not, for instance, played today. And in my productions, which go back about 12 years, I have done several sections, and some of them are very important. One particularly because it rectifies what is a nonsense sentence in today's opera. And that is in the next act, which you're going to hear, after the fight between Jose and Escamillo. After Carmen runs in, Escamillo will get up, brush himself off, and address Don Jose with the words, Quant à toi, beau soldat, nous sommes manche à manche, et nous jouerons la belle, etc. That means, as for you, handsome soldier, we are now even. We each won a fight, but the audience will only see one fight, and it is a rather dreadful thing for a great heroic gentleman like Escamillo to after being subdued to get up and say, now we're even. Yeah. It isn't anything but even. He's just been saved by a girl, you know, from certain death. That's not being even. And in the original version, there were several fights, of which three actually, of which two were won by Escamillo and only one by Jose. And these three fights, for instance, should be reinstated in the production, or else the sentence should be changed. But I like the original version very much.
Yes. Mr. Covenny.
Couldn't we stretch it and say there was a fourth version? Because after the first act was completed, Bizet composed other things for another year, and Gali Marié, the first Carmen, who actually agreed to sing it before any music was written, was displeased with the song that he wrote in the first act for her. It was then called Carmen's Song. He then rewrote that song and put in what we now call the habanera, which was somebody else's melody, Iradier's, the same man about
Mr. Stivender?
Well, I
do you
think
want to comment on that?
In addition to that, you know, you can have endless permutations of how many versions there are, but like every composer of the theater, he wrote his score, and once it went into the theater, many changes were made.
Yes.
The ending, as we know it now, ended with the Toreador song in F sharp major, with harps going on and all kinds of, which once he got in the theater, he changed. And the orchestration, for example, that last F sharp, which sounds so empty, when Guiraud did it, he put the trombones and trumpets on the stage to save some money. But in Bizet's score, there are trombones and trumpets on that F sharp.
Tell me, do you have a preference, all of you gentlemen, among the various versions, Mr. Stivender, since you've just been speaking of this?
I must say, when you go straight through it in the version that has been made available, it has a sense of completeness. Everything falls into place. It's very nice. I think it would be endless. I can go on.
You mean now you're talking about the original one, Mr. Mohr?
No, I think that probably the most dramatically convincing of the three is the one that we're all familiar with. But at the same time, I do prefer, to a certain extent, the original version, which is more diffuse, but it gives you more of a sense of a continuity in a storyline, because Carmen, masterpiece as it is, as we know it today, to me sometimes seems like a collection of marvelous set pieces, and you hear the habanera or you hear the Cigarette Girls chorus, then somebody else comes on and does the duet, and it's a marvelous collection of things that don't always make up an opera. It's for that reason that I would prefer.
Are you speaking now in favor of the spoken dialogue as being more,
to a certain
more
extent,
dramatic,
and at the same time, I will say, you know, the spoken dialogue can slow it down incredibly and vitiate the drama inherent in the story.
Perhaps so, Mr. Covenny.
Has the completely sung version ever been performed in France?
The completely sung one?
Yes, I mean, with all the recitatives.
They the Grand Opera. Mr. Goldovsky will answer that for us.
Oh, yes, of course. They perform both versions in Paris. At the Comique, they perform the dialogue version, the Grand Opéra de Récité version. But to answer your question, Mr. Downs, I do prefer the dialogue version. I think it's much better theater. And as a matter of fact, I'm touring next all around the country, the dialogue version, adding quite a bit of music, which has not been heard, generally speaking. What happens, of course, is that one has to make one's own choices. One omits certain things, one adds certain other things, just as the composer himself has done. One makes cuts or things of that sort.
Yes, Mr. Stivender.
Mr. Goldovsky, I just looked it up last night, but with the exception of the fight, isn't most of the extra music local color kind of thing?
No, sir. No, a wonderful moment in the second act between Carmen and Jose. 14 measures where she repeats his words with great effect. Wonderful is the addition of the Cavaliers who whisper words of love.
That's still local color, really.
Why is it local color? It's part of the story. The way you heard the opera today, they say, "Nous vous suivrons en murmurant des propos d'amour." We will whisper words of love to you, and then they are completely tongue-tied, never say one single word. But I like operas to make sense.
I'd like to ask you, gentlemen, how about the stabbing of Carmen, which seems to me in the original version of Bizet to be much more dramatic?
Well,
Mr.
there's
Stivender?
some. Excuse me.
Please, Mr. Goldovsky.
There's some difference there. You know that actually that has never been restored.
I know, but
there's some
that's why
missing
I think
measures.
it would be very
there is
dramatic.
a version in which she repeats the same words with which she, the fortune-telling words.
Oh, yes, yes.
Death, death, which is
Still
sort of
another.
effective. But in this newly discovered, as you say, or newly compiled edition, they use the old ending and not the new ending, which, according to the editor, probably is the one that finally was chosen by Bizet.
But with much more elaborate chorus and so on.
Yeah,
I find
much
that
more
extremely
elaborate
dramatic
so,
looking.
yes,
Mr. Stivender.
I think the change is that "Eh bien donné" right now. The backstage has yum ba da dum
Yeah,
bum
that's
bum,
nice.
and then the chord, and he stabs over all the dee da dum in the orchestra. But
very
the original is
effective.
a B major chord where he stabs her.
Yeah.
Then it says he throws himself on her body, and the pianissimo toreador song is sung backstage.
Also
and
very
he just
effective,
that's
yeah.
all that dee da dum then stands for. His agony over the death of Carmen, rather than her being thrust aside.
Both
and
versions
whatnot.
are very
It's
effective.
very-
Yes, it's a
Mr.
question of
Covenny
choice.
wants to add something, I think.
Well, I'm asking a question. Obviously, both these men know a great deal about it. Where was it discovered? Was it really ever lost, or has it always been extant? And
Well, what
Mr.
happened, you see,
Goldovsky?
is very interesting. As I told you, the National Library has the original autograph, but it's incomplete. And when we got the microfilm, and those of us who have the microfilm, unfortunately didn't have the whole thing. But these particular people, they are Germans, incidentally, which should redound to the eternal shame of the French, went to the Opéra Comique archives and found in them the so-called particellas. That means the special written out sections for the various singers. And the old orchestra parts. On the basis of the particellas and the orchestra parts, they were able to restore the whole shooting match from beginning to the end, which is a wonderful work of scholarship and a great contribution to Carmen lore.
Well, I want to thank Ron Bagnier for those beautiful Toreador chimes and the chimes for the season. And as our listeners know, these mean that the third act of Bizet's Carmen is almost ready to begin. Unfortunately, they also mean that our quiz is over not only for today, but for this season. So thank you very much, John Covenny, Boris Goldovsky, Richard Mohr, and David Stivender. Texaco's Opera Quiz has been a regular intermission feature since the first broadcast sponsored by Texaco on December 7th, 1940, so that today marks the end of its 28th consecutive season. The interest that our listeners have shown us through writing in letters and questions is responsible for the long life of the quiz, and without these questions, there would be no quiz. So thank you all very, very much. This is Edward Downs wishing you a happy summer and looking forward to our next broadcast season, which will start on December 7th with Verdi's Rigoletto. Thank you.